Output growth recovery was relatively strong in 2021. It is, however, expected to progress reasonably in 2022, following considerable improvement during the third quarter of 2021 and a positive outlook for the fourth quarter of 2021. This is hinged on the continued support of both the monetary and fiscal authorities to sustain the current momentum. The committee reviewed the developments in the global and domestic economic and financial environments in 2021, as well as the outlook and risks for 2022. 10 members of the committee attended this meeting. Global developments. The committee noted that while the recovery of the global economy in 2021 fell below the initial forecasts, final estimates showed considerable improvement over the 2020 outcome and evidence that the global economy was pulling out of the doldrum associated with the pandemic. Consequently, the recovery is gaining momentum with increasing consumer spending, upswing in investments, and soaring world merchandise trade above pre-pandemic levels. These reflect the resilience of economic agents in the face of new strains of the virus and rising infection rates. The committee, however, took cognizance of significant headwinds confronting the global economy in 2022, largely associated with persistent threats of new variants of the coronavirus. The advanced economies are, however, in a stronger position to offset the impact of these headwinds with stronger policy support and better access to COVID-19 vaccines. Consequently, this group of economies have shown better resilience towards the disruptions to recovery. In the second term, however, the rising inflationary pressures and the gradual withdrawal of both monetary and fiscal stimulus may dampen the recovery expected in 2022. As for the emerging markets and developing economies, poor access to vaccines and limited policy support meant that this group of economies have been harder hit by the COVID-19 and its associated macroeconomic downturn. In China, for instance, one of the few countries that stayed out of recession in 2020, output weakened during the third quarter of 2021 and has continued to weaken as the COVID infection continues to rage amid power supply problems and turbulent property market in that economy. Following the containment of the infections in India, the economy has commenced a sharp recovery and is set to continue on an upward trajectory. Overall, growth in the emerging markets and developing economies is expected to slow in 2022 due to the low level of vaccination and limited policy support in several economies in this group. On price developments, MPC observed that inflation in most advanced economies remain high and unlikely to abate in the short to medium term. This is driven by the persistence of supply-side disruptions and pent-up demand associated with recovery from the virus. In the emerging markets and developing economies, inflation has also remained high due to a combination of persisting exchange rate pressures and supply bottlenecks associated with lockdown restrictions. With the US Fed and other advanced economies central banks now moving towards monetary policy normalization, the eventual lift-off of interest rates may likely trigger a huge capital outflow from the emerging markets and developing economies, which would further aggravate exchange rate pressures with a pass-through to domestic prices. Global financial markets data shows significant sell-off as investors continue to rebalance their portfolios with a shift from assets such as gold and emerging market securities to advanced economy securities, suggesting market response to the impending interest rate lift-off. Global financial conditions are thus expected to tighten as risk-averse portfolio investors reassign their portfolios from perceived riskier emerging market securities to less risky advanced economy securities with the expectation of improved yields. the domestic developments. Staff projections show that the economy is expected to remain on a path of positive growth given the impressive performance during the third quarter of 2021 and continuing rebound in economic activities. Committee noted with satisfaction the significant improvement in the Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index, PMI, which rose to 52.0 index points in December 2021 compared with 50.8 index points in November 2021, reflecting the continuing economic recovery. This expansion was driven largely by increasing business activities in the economy, leading to increase in new orders and uptrend in employment and production levels. The non-manufacturing PMI, however, declined marginally to 48.0 index points in December 2021 from 48.6% points in November, largely reflecting a decline in services. Committee noted with concern the slight increase in headline inflation year-on-year to 15.63% in December 2021 from 15.4% in November, following 7 consecutive months of decline. The unexpected increase was attributed to both the food and core components, which rose to 17.37 and 13.87% in December 2021 from 17.21 and 13.85% in November, respectively. Committee, however, expressed confidence in the bank's sustained intervention programs, noting that inflation will continue to abate as food supply improves. Members also noted that the seasonal drive in price development associated with the December festive period was largely contributory to the marginal increase in price levels, and as such, believes that this episode of increase in December may indeed be temporary. Reviewing the developments in monetary aggregates, committee noted that broad money supply M3 rose further to 13.77% in December 2021 compared with 10.10% in November 2021. This upthrust was largely driven by the growth in net domestic assets, NTA, of 15.58% in December 2021 compared with 9.4% in November 2021. Net foreign assets, however, decreased to 6.06% in December 2021 compared with 14.98% in November 2021. The sharp growth in net domestic assets was largely attributed to an increase in claims on the federal government and other sectors. The slowdown in growth of net foreign assets resulted from a decrease in foreign assets holdings of the banking system in favor of more domestic investments. Committee reviewed the performance of the bank's various interventions aimed at stimulating productivity in the manufacturing and industries, agriculture, energy and infrastructure, healthcare, and micro, small, and medium enterprises between November and December 2021. Under the Anchor Borrowers Program, the banks disbursed 75.99 billion to support the cultivation of over 383,000 hectares of maize, rice, and wheat during the 2022 dry season, bringing the cumulative disbursement under the program to 927.94 billion to over 4.5 million smallholder farmers cultivating 21 commodities across the country. All excess outputs aggregated from the financed farmers will be released to the Nigerian Commodity Exchange to help moderate the prices of food in the market. The bank also released 1.76 billion to finance 2 large-scale agricultural projects under the Commercial Agricultural Credit Scheme. In addition, the bank disbursed the sum of 151.23 billion under the Real Sector Facility to 15 additional projects in agriculture, manufacturing, mining, and services. The funds were utilized for both greenfield and brownfield projects under the COVID-19 intervention for the manufacturing sector and Real Sector Support Facility from differentiated cash reserve requirements. Cumulative disbursements under the rail sector support facility currently stood at 1.4 trillion naira, disbursed to 331 projects across the country. As part of its efforts to support the resilience of the healthcare sector, the bank also disbursed 498 million naira to 2 healthcare projects under the Health Care Support Intervention Facility, bringing the cumulative disbursements to 108.85 billion naira to 118 projects comprising 31 pharmaceuticals, 82 hospitals, and 4 other services. To support our households and businesses affected by COVID-19, the bank disbursed 20.29 billion to 40,521,000 beneficiaries, comprising 35,340 households and 5,181 small businesses under the targeted credit facility within the period. The cumulative disbursement under the targeted credit facility TCF stood at 369.78 billion to 777,666 beneficiaries, comprising 648,052 households and 129,614 small businesses. To further promote entrepreneurship development among Nigerian youths, the bank disbursed 293 million naira to 59 beneficiaries under the recently introduced Tertiary Institutions Entrepreneurship Scheme TIES. Under the National Mass Metering Program, the sum of 47.83 billion naira was disbursed for the procurement and installation of 857,026 electricity meters across the country under the scheme's Phase 0. We also note the improved collection by DISCOs as a result of the increased meter installations. The bank also released 254.33 billion to power sector players as part of its efforts to support the sector under the Nigerian Bulk Electricity Trading Payments Assurance Facility, NBED-PAF. This was in addition to 20.58 billion naira released to distribution companies under the Nigeria Electricity Market Stabilization Facility, Phase 2. To further support the development of the enabling infrastructure in the gas industry, the bank released additional 3 billion naira for the augmentation of an existing infrastructure, bringing the cumulative disbursement under the intervention facility for National Gas Expansion Program to 42.2 billion for 6 projects. Furthermore, under the 100 for 100 policy on production and productivity, which was introduced to stimulate the flow of finance and investments to enterprises and projects with potential to kickstart a sustainable economic growth trajectory, accelerate structural transformation, promote diversification, and improve productivity, the bank has received notifications or applications for 224 projects valued at 294.91 billion naira for real sector projects in agriculture, energy, healthcare, manufacturing, and services. The applications are currently being processed, and the first batch of beneficiaries under the intervention will be announced and advertised in the national dailies on 31st of January 2022, with their names published in national dailies. These projects have been carefully selected in line with the approved selection criteria as contained in our guidelines. Money market rates fluctuated within and above the asymmetric corridor, reflecting prevailing liquidity conditions in the banking system. The monthly weighted average open buyback OBB rate increased to 12.75% in December 2021 from 10.61% in November 2021. The increase in the open buyback OBB rate reflected the tight liquidity conditions in the banking system. The MPC noted the continuing positive performance in the equities market in the review period, with the all-share index and market capitalization increasing by 1.61 and 1.63% to 42,716.44 and 22.3 trillion naira on December 31, 2021 from 42,038.60 and 21.94 trillion naira on October 29, 2021, respectively. This positive performance reflects improved corporate earnings as investors increase participation in the market. The MPC also noted the sustained resilience of the banking system following the progressive improvement in the non-performing loans ratio from 5.10% in November 2021 to 4.85% in December 2021, a first in a long time and indeed over many years. The committee also noted that the liquidity ratio remained well above its prudential limit at 41.3%, though capital adequacy ratio declined marginally to 14.53% in December 2021 from 19.90% during the previous month. Committee thus urged the bank to sustain its firm regulatory surveillance. Banks members noted the continued improvement in the external reserves despite ongoing exchange rate pressures. The reserves stood at $40.2 billion as of December 2022. Outlook. The broad outlook for the recovery in both the global and domestic economies is clouded with uncertainty as the resurgence of the COVID-19 pandemic, driven by new and mutating strains of the coronavirus, persistent supply bottlenecks, high and rising inflationary pressures, and dwindling monetary and fiscal stimulus. Emerging markets and developing economies are likely to experience a sharp downturn as a result of the identified headwinds confronting the outlook. This is hinged on the back of the ongoing two-speed recovery of the global economy, driven by continued disparities in the administration of vaccines between the advanced economies and the emerging markets and developing economies. Whereas the advanced economies will also experience a downturn in 2022, this group of economies are expected to take a less severe hit as most of them have achieved significantly high levels of vaccination within their communities. Star forecast project output growth at 3.1% in 2021 with an expected better outcome in 2022, consistent with the expected improved macroeconomic performance. This is predicated on expected headwinds which continue to impact global recovery. The economy is, however, expected to progress gradually with the recovery with ongoing support by the monetary and fiscal authorities, progress with COVID-19 vaccination, and continued high crude oil prices. After a moderate increase in December 2021, headline inflation is expected to trend marginally upwards in the short term before moderating towards the end of the first quarter of 2022. This moderation is expected as food harvests progress towards the end of the first quarter of 2022, thus improving food supply. In general, with the bank sustaining its intervention programs through the year, food inflation is expected to trend downwards in 2022. Available forecasts for key macroeconomic variables for the Nigerian economy indicate expected rebound in output growth for most of 2022, sustained by ongoing broad monetary and fiscal stimulus. Accordingly, the Nigerian economy is forecast to grow in 2022 by 2.86% CBN estimate, 4.2% Federal Government of Nigeria estimate, and 2.7% IMF estimate. Committee's consideration. Committee assessed the balance of risks confronting the domestic economy in the near term as they impact output growth and price stability. Members noted the unrelenting effort by the monetary and fiscal authorities in mitigating the impact of the virus on the economy. It observed the continued moderate recovery of the domestic economy, but requires further concerted policy effort by both the monetary and fiscal authorities to improve the momentum and strengthen their recovery. members were thus of the view that building on the improved growth in the third quarter and the positive PMIs in the fourth quarter of 2021, output growth is expected to strengthen into 2022. On the pandemic, MPC reviewed its continued impact on the domestic economy as members collectively agreed that the downside risks were still hindering the recovery. In this light, it commended the efforts of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 for procuring vaccines and continuing the drive to ensure that most Nigerians are fully vaccinated. On price development, members continue to express concerns about the impact of insecurity in farming communities on food inflation. Whereas headline inflation had been moderating for several months, committee believed that its recent uptick was associated with increased demand during the festive season and was thus of the view that the prices will return to the downward trajectory given the bank's ongoing interventions in the agricultural sector. On this note, members applauded the efforts of the bank with the recent launch of the rice pyramids, noting that these efforts to increase food supply and stem food inflation were in the right direction. Members, however, reiterated the key role of the federal government in providing the necessary security around the country, and particularly in the farming communities, to ensure that farmers and their produce remain safe and food supply is both boosted and uninterrupted. Committee also noted that the ongoing dry season farming will further improve food supply and dampen prices. Members noted the ongoing debate around the removal of fuel subsidy and suggested a robust engagement with the relevant groups in the country and afterwards follow a stepwise and gradual approach to ensure its moderate impact on cost of transportation and energy for individual, households, and firms. Committee also noted the need to encourage the takeoff of our private refineries across the country in order to provide alternative competitive local supply source and reduce the need for government intervention to manage fuel prices for domestic consumption. In addition to this, urged the speedy conclusion of the government gas-powered vehicles conversion scheme and other alternative fuel-powered sources. On exchange rate, committee applauded the management's efforts at maintaining stability over the short term with increasing demand as the economy continues to reopen. Members noted the dwindling proceeds from oil sales, despite rising crude oil prices. They further noted the need to address the persistent reduction in remittance of oil revenue to the Consolidated Revenue Fund and urged NNPC to urgently address this annually. This improved foreign exchange supply will thus support the bank's demand management strategy in the foreign exchange market and consolidate macroeconomic performance, especially those that promote export, reduce dependence on import, and reduce foreign exchange demand pressures. MPC welcomed the improvement in foreign capital inflow through diaspora remittances and urged the bank to further extend the incentive scope to attract more remittances to official channels. The committee noted the rising government debt profile and the concentration of the funding sources and its implication for fiscal sustainability and macroeconomic stability, including its impact on financial system performance and growth. MPC continued to urge the government on the need to harness other sources of revenue to reduce its dependence on oil as a single revenue source. In addition, it reiterated the need for government to seek alternative and more viable and indeed more efficient infrastructure financing sources in order to ease its expenditure burden. To this end, members called on the fiscal authorities to take advantage of the private sector-driven vehicle for the Infrastructure Corporation of Nigeria in order to transfer viable infrastructure projects for consideration by the corporation, as this would ease pressure on government in its drive to raise revenue through taxes from an already burdened private sector and household sector. The improved performance of equities market during the review period signposted continued investor confidence in the Nigerian economy. This, in the view of members, was a positive sign that the economy remained on a path to a more robust medium-term recovery. The banking sector indices in the consideration of members showed no less resilience as other macroeconomic indicators reviewed, even as obvious downside risks associated with the pandemic continued to impact the business environment. Members thus applauded the management's efforts in ensuring the continued downward trend of the non-performing loans ratio, signifying improved conditions in the banking system. Nevertheless, members emphasized the need for the bank to closely monitor developments in the sector and swiftly respond to any emerging challenges. The committee's decision. The MPC observed with concern the moderate rise in inflation in December 2021, noting that this was typical of increased aggregate demand associated with the end of the year festive activities. Members, however, expressed their continued commitment to drive down domestic prices by putting in place relevant policy measures to curb the rise in inflationary pressures while also supporting the fragile recovery. In its determination as to whether to hold or loosen or tighten its policy stance, MPC was mindful that whereas the US and some advanced economies have signaled their intention to commence policy normalization, which may result in capital flow reversals for the emerging market and developing economies, the major focus of these climbs were targeted mainly at reining in the high level of inflation, which had been unprecedented in the last 4 decades in those climbs. For Nigeria, members were of the view that Nigeria is confronted by not only inflation, but also fragile output. As a result, MPC believes that its current stance of price and monetary stability, conducive for growth, remain desirable. The MPC is convinced that various measures being implemented were helping not in boosting output growth, but also in moderating inflation. MPC therefore enjoined management to continue to use its development finance tools to accelerate output growth, which would also help in boosting manufacturing output that would ultimately help in moderating prices. It also requested management to continue its use of administrative measures, including discretionary tools at its disposal through the CRL to control money supply in the economy. In its final consideration, the committee was clear that a loosening option was not desirable because it would trigger further liquidity surfeit and fuel inflationary pressure, as available funds may outstrip the economy's absorptive capacity or domestic capacity utilization. It also feels loosening could trigger foreign exchange demand pressure, as the excess liquidity will be channeled to either frivolous importations or speculative holding of foreign exchange as alternative investment channels narrow, leading to foreign exchange depreciation and or inflation. MPC also dropped a tightening option at this meeting in view of the fragile state of the current gross domestic product growth rate and potential external and domestic headwinds confronting the economy. MPC also feels that tightening could truncate the steady improvement in credit performance, including other financial soundness indicators, and reverse the declining trend in NPLs. Moreover, MPC feels tightening could counteract the CBN's credit expansion motive as a necessary condition for improved economic growth and employment generation. The MPC therefore concluded that a hold stance remains desirable at this time, as this would indicate a conservative but cautious and consistent policy choice given the prevailing economic conditions and outlook, thus strengthening the policy credibility and focus. It also feels that a hold will signal MPC's realization of the fragility of the growth recovery and its sensitivity to emerging global and domestic uncertainties. Hence, the need to sustain policy trajectory. After a careful balancing of the benefits and downside risks of each policy option, MPC decided to hold all policy parameters constant, believing that a hold stance will enable the continued permeation of current policy measures in supporting the recorded growth recovery and further boost production and productivity, which would ultimately rein in inflation in the short to medium term. The committee thus decided by a unanimous vote to retain monetary policy MPR at 11.5%. In summary, MPC voted to retain 1. MPR at 11.5%, 2. Retain the asymmetric corridor at plus 100 and minus 700 basis points around the MPR, 3. Retain the CRR at 27.5%, and 4. Retain liquidity ratio at 30%. I thank you most sincerely for your attention.
Thank you, Governor. And that was the communique number 140 of the MPC meeting held 24th and 25th January 2022. We shall take some questions from the press. And just tell us your name, the media house you represent, and your question. Thank you.
Good afternoon and Happy New Year, Mr. Governor. My name is Nduka Chejine of the Nation newspaper. You are very aware of the US and other advanced economies adopting normalization policy of raising rates so as to tighten and mop up forex liquidity. Why is Nigeria monetary policy not following this lead, given that there will be large forex outflows? Secondly, with inflation beginning to move up, should we expect any signaling soon that rates may move up to rein in inflation? Thank you.
Good afternoon, Governor. My name is Uche Usim of the Sun Newspapers. Congratulations last week for your rice pyramid.
Which newspaper?
The Sun.
Sun, okay.
Yeah. I'm concerned about the people talking about the price of rice. It's still very high. What are you going to do about that? Why is it still very high despite this revolution? Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, Governor. My name is Biodun Dare from Radio Nigeria. You made mention of the 100 for 100 policy program. Please, can you throw more light on the companies that have been selected and what to expect soon? Also, since the launch of the e-Naira in October, what is the status of that project today?
Which newspaper?
Radio Nigeria.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Governor and members of the MPC. Happy New Year. I have 3 questions. The first 2 questions will be off what you said. The first question is around cyber crimes, because you mentioned the financial system earlier. Cyber crimes have been on the rise. Cyber attacks globally costing about 6 trillion in 2021. What's the CBN doing to protect the financial system about that? Then the second one is the rise of loan sharks too in Nigeria. We understand that loan sharks are neither regulated nor registered. Many Nigerians have been victims. I've seen people even write to me personally on that. So what's the Central Bank of Nigeria doing to check the activities of the loan sharks? Then number 3, I also want to get in specific terms what the CBN would do concerning inflation. I know you've talked about it earlier, but we know that the purchasing power of Nigerians have been eroded in the last 2 or 3 years. Average inflation last year, 16%. That is still high. What's the CBN going to do to manage inflation to 2022? Thank you, Governor.
Okay, Governor, there are also 2 questions from some of our friends who were unable to be here physically. Now, one is Collins Nweke of Nation newspaper. And his question is, there are reported cases of the scarcity of naira at the banks, especially lower denominations. What is the true situation and what is the CBN doing to address this? And the next question is from Bamidele Ogunwusi of Daily Independent. Mr. Governor, there are concerns about the increase in the volume of non-performing loans, NPL, in the Nigerian banking sector, which are said to be threatening the operations of some of the banks. What is the current status of NPLs, and are the banks safe? Thank you, Governor.
Yeah, thank you very much. On the first question from Chejina, asking that we've seen that the advanced economies, the US and some advanced economies have signaled a policy of normalization, which is that they want to withdraw liquidity or some of the stimulus they had provided as a result of COVID-19, that they wanted to withdraw them from the economy by raising rates. You are very correct. That is true. Normalization will naturally lead to capital flow reversals, particularly for the emerging markets and developing economies. Because usually, as a result, some of those funds that were released into the advanced economies during the period of COVID-19, some of them actually flowed into